Good evening and welcome to the Culture Show. Our guests this evening include Kat Brogan, who is part of Omagh Pride. Conor McClusy is joining Andrew Maguire to talk about Irish literature. Brendan McCarthy is back with us, and we have Father Donal Bennett. We will have Father Kevin McElhennan at some other stage of the shows, but we're having Father Donal Bennett this evening. But for now, we're going to continue as the Bob Quick Quintet, and with a lovely song called On the Street Where You Live. I have often walked down the street before, but the pavement always stayed beneath my feet before. All at once am I several stories high, knowing I'm on the street where you live. Are there lilac trees in the heart of town? Can you hear a lark in any other part of town? Does enchantment pour out of every door? No, it's just on the street where you live. But ooh, that towering feeling, just to somehow you are near. The overpowering feeling that any second you may suddenly appear. People stop and stare, they don't bother me, for there's nowhere else on earth that I would rather be. Let the time go by, I won't care if I can be here on the street where you live. Can be here on the street where you live. On the street where you live. On the street where you live. We're going to continue the music now with a lovely song called Wichita Lineman, sung by our legend, Aidan McGill.
I am a lineman for the county, and I drive the main road, searching in the sun for another overload. I hear you singing through the wires, and I can hear you through the wine. and the Wichita lineman are still on the line. I know I need a small vacation, but it don't look like rain. And if it snows, that stretch down south won't ever stand the strain. And I need you more than want you, and I want you for all time. And the Wichita lineman still on the line. And I need you more than want you, and I want you for all time. And the Wichita lineman still on the line.
Thank you, Aidan. That was absolutely wonderful. Again, he told me to say that. We're now going to go over to Andrew Maguire, who's talking with Conor McClusy.
Hello, I'm here with Conor McClusy. Conor is a teacher at the Christian Brothers Grammar School here in Omagh. He's also a member of the committee for the Omagh Literary Festival, a role in which he has chaired, taken part in many literary events in Omagh over the years. I, like so many people that went on to study English at university from Omagh, was lucky enough to be taught by Conor back in the day, and I've also been involved in many of the great events he's taken part with in the Omagh Literary Festival, so I'm delighted to have him here today and to ask him a few questions about the books that have inspired him over the years. Conor, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Andrew.
I'd like to start by asking you a bit about your time growing up and the books you were reading then and how literature was involved in your early life.
Yeah, well, I suppose I was a pretty avid reader, and in my early years, and I suppose as an English teacher, it's that period when you're often trying to encourage kids to read. It's that trough, maybe especially for boys from about 13 to 15 years of age, and it's sort of making the bridge for those kids between, you know, teenage literature and kids literature, and then I suppose the world of adult literature. And you're just trying to show really and get them to think about how the great works of art, I suppose, in literature are applicable to their lives and are not some sort of unnecessary canon of work that was just written to annoy 15, 16 and 17 year olds as they studied for GCSEs and A-levels. But I suppose what really the big point I've always tried to make about literature is that it's I suppose it's that bridge between ourselves and the great thinkers of the past, in the same way that maybe classical music has that role. And the way I suppose to foster that in kids is to show that works are applicable. So by the time we were studying A-level English and we were looking at books, maybe Victorian novels such as Wuthering Heights and maybe The Mayor of Casterbridge, you're beginning to see that these works of art have an applicability to your own life as you live it. And great lines from works such as The Mayor of Casterbridge, like, unlike Cain, Henchard would bear the weight of his grief. And you know, you're beginning to realise that this is wisdom for all of us as we go through life, and it's not just some sort of esoteric branch of knowledge that's there to decay and ossify. It's there to be accessed by all of us, and that's, I suppose, where teaching comes in, to try and get people to see that this stuff is applicable and has a real merit.
I know that, you know, from studying like at GCSE and A-level myself, one of the possible ways that students engage with something is with through Irish writers and maybe feeling that touch of home. I know one of the books you want to talk about is Brian Friel's translations, but could you start by telling us a bit about maybe the influence that Irish literature had on you as a young student, and that it maybe still has on students today?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because traditionally you were studying English literature, so effectively everything that was American literature or was Anglo-Irish literature to an extent wasn't English literature. Anglo-Irish literature, of course, is Irish literature written in English, and that became more common as I was studying at school. But certainly there's been a growth in the studying of Irish writers, I think, in the English language, which is very important. Obviously Irish language poets are incredibly important as well, but you're obviously not going to study those in an English literature course. So Brian Friel's work was very much on the curriculum. Seamus Heaney's was much later to come on the curriculum, but is very much present there now as well. Yeats has been on the curriculum for a long time, and obviously deservedly so. Beckett's work has been Waiting for Godot and so on. But there hasn't been a complete overkill of Irish work. Patrick Kavanagh's work to some extent. But I personally think, that Friel's work is very accessible for, school children, where some of the poetry might be more esoteric and more A-level based for Yeats and Heaney and so on. Friel's play Philadelphia Here I Come has been a sort of a standard text at GCSE for a long time. I don't think it's shown its age as such, that it's out of date. It's just off its time, but it's still a miraculous sort of portrayal of one man's journey navigating emigration really in the 1950s, although it's obviously written in performed first in 1964. But it really captures that age of emigration and disaffection that a lot of young people felt. By the time Friel, I suppose, is nearly 50 in 1980, that sort of period, or just before it, he really is, he sort of produces, it's his heyday in terms of producing his masterpieces. He writes a very rare play, in a sense, called Aristocrats, which is a very, as I say, rare thing. It's a big Irish Catholic house play as such, whereas the big house is normally associated with the ascendancy class. And so it's sort of very much a Chekhovian play with these great characters who are sort of, for want of a better term, Irish upper middle class, as you might describe them. So they're not a group of people that have been well documented in literature or indeed any other place. His great play of the same period, he writes these three plays almost simultaneously, I think, or certainly in the same time period, is Faith Healer, which is the great document about what it is to be an artist really, and the gift of being able to perform and so on. And we could talk about it for ages too. But the play, I suppose, all writers want to be contextually significant through no maybe fault or fluke of their own. It just happens that way. And Friel, of course, is living at the height of the Troubles and has continually been asked, what will you write, and so on. And he's sort of written Agitprop, which is his great play, Freedom in the City, after Bloody Sunday, which is sort of a great play, but it's quite didactic in that sense, and he really wants to, I think, he's obviously thinking about how can I turn this into real art and turn this into one of my sort of greatest plays, in which Ballybeg is to the fore, and that place that he always talks about in all his plays, and is the setting for the vast majority of them. And in translations, he succeeds in doing that, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I want to go back a bit because when you talked about Philadelphia Here I Come, and I think it's good that you mentioned how it hasn't aged at all in many ways, both thematically and also just in the form of it, where you have these two characters, or on stage two actors playing the inner and the outer version of the protagonist. I mean, in many ways that's something we could maybe expect to see in a Netflix produced drama nowadays. It is very almost ahead of its time in that regard, and very modern. But when you talk on the themes of emigration and whatnot, is that very much a factor in what you speak of when you're how a student will identify with something when they see a moment in history that is still alive within this text today, and that they can access and experience in their own way? Yeah,
that's a very good question, and I think with Friel you get the subtlety of that. Freedom of the City, because of the nature, maybe had to be quite a didactic play, but it's more than that. It's a brilliant play. But translations becomes this, yeah, well, do you want me to write something about what's happening in Ireland now? But he comes at it from such an oblique angle and brilliantly, manages to, as a result, turn it into great art, really. And what's at the heart of translations is that central conceit that probably everyone knows, in that it's a play in English, but the characters are meant to be speaking Irish. Mm-hmm. But it's essentially a play about the loss of the Irish language. So that tremendous irony is apparent to the audience as they watch the play. I've talked about the contextuality of it. Translations, of course, everyone else would have thought, well, will he write another play set during the Troubles? Or will he write about a massive event in Irish history like during the famine? But he sets the play in 1833, which doesn't seem like one of the more momentous years. It's pre-famine, but echoes of the famine or echoes of previous famines and foreshadowing of the coming great famine are all in the text. But he sets it sort of in an Edenic time, a time of perfection. The majority of his plays have been set in that period in August when the weather's good and so on, so that Ireland becomes a sort of an idyllic place. And this 1833 locale, Ballybeog, because it's in Irish, or because it's situated in Ireland in an Irish-speaking area at the time, it becomes sort of an idyllic pastoral that all the characters come to life. It represents a world that's gone, a world that's vanishing even as the people inhabit it. And you've got all that going on, Friel creating this magnificent world, but everything that he does in the play is significant to the themes that he's trying to elucidate, namely that everything vanishes, all civilizations come and go, and there's, who's left to document them? Often it's the conqueror. Mm-hmm. And really, that came from his reading of people like George Steiner, and also Oscar Levita, who had influenced previous plays. Levita was interested in the socialism idea that, how do you respond to colonialism? And this is represented in this play, I think, in the sense that you can act like Dolte in the play, you're a joker and you take the hand, or you can collaborate, for want of a better word, and just go with the flow in the way that Owen does. And he works as one of the people changing the place names into English. And I suppose the other response is the unseen Donnelly twins who have a violent response, and that's very much reflecting how sociological work in the period in the 60s and 70s about how colonial people respond to the colonial power. And Oscar Levita was writing about South America, or in Levita was writing about South America. George Steiner was coming at it much more from a linguistics point of view, and he was making the point that maybe all civilizations vanish, and the person left to talk about it is the conquering power.
I wonder, on that note, because with Friel, when he's talking about these periods in time, do you think, is that his legacy today? Do you think is that the benefit he has for modern audiences, is that when they engage with his work, whether it's reading the text or seeing it on stage, that they're getting this time capsule look at a period in time, and that's what his legacy, is that what he has to offer today?
That's a good point too. Yeah, I think so. But also, it's so much. It's a time capsule for then, and of course, he's going to have romanticised it deliberately, maybe for effect. But that doesn't make it any less accurate in some ways. But it also is very reflective of what's happening in contemporary times, especially in the time that the play was written. And of course, but Friel, of course, there's so much going on that to represent these lost civilizations. There's Jimmy Jack recites Greek in the play. There's lots of Latin in the play to represent these classical civilizations that have gone for all intents and purposes, but are kept alive. And I think Friel sort of sums up the play brilliantly with the quote from the Aeneid from Virgil at the end of the play, where sensing the loss but maybe not being able to vocalize it in English or Irish, Hugh has to resort to Latin, and he quotes from the Aeneid. And the lines translated are, "There once was an ancient tower." But the great irony of it is that this is a Roman poet opening a text which is about the destruction of Troy. And that's effectively what Friel has done in his play. He's an English language playwright, writing about the loss of Irish Gaelic civilization to some extent in the west of Ireland.
I want to move on a wee bit and talk a bit about poetry. And I suppose that I always think, we'll link this in a bit with your time at university, because I always think when you study English at university, you get so deep in the analytical side of things sometimes that it becomes hard to then switch that off when it comes to your own reading and whatnot. And I wonder, did you study poetry at university, and how do you find that now? If you're reading poetry in your day-to-day life, do you analyse it, or are you able to enjoy it and take it on its own merit to how it connects to you?
Yeah, very much so. You know, when you have to study poetry in depth, you know, I think there's not a resentment, but you know, you're going at a job of work. You know, when you're a student, I think that'd be fair to say. When you're teaching it, it's a different kettle of fish, because you have to be totally on top of it to try and impart it. And then the third strand that you're talking about is sort of reading it for pleasure. And I think you eventually sort of try and do all three, and you manage to not lose your love of it. So you really tend to find then poets that you really can admire. We were often packed off when we were at college in groups and pairs to look at great poems from the past. And it was a great thing, because you were collaborating with other people, and then you'd have to come back and present it. That was probably ahead of its time in that sense. I think the more you have a mutually shared conversation with somebody about poetry, as opposed to this isolated figure, beaver and away in a room trying to work it out. Of course, like the claim all English teachers make about poems, they're never as difficult as they appear. They're not designed to be deliberately difficult, and they're a means of communication in a form that's really applicable. I suppose the best poets that I've read in university and beyond, you would tend to think they've not only got a great thematic point to get across, you know, they're sort of what Seamus Heaney would have called probably their technique, but they also are a great craftsman. You know, so you've got technique, which is sort of your attitude to the world, and craft, your ability to put it in a form that really represents lyrically what you want to say. And
so could you tell us a bit about poets you particularly admire? I know Elizabeth Bishop is one of them. Tell us a bit about how you've engaged with their work and what it is about their work that strikes you. Yeah, well, I think, to be honest, I was trying to think about how these two poets, Elizabeth Bishop and Milosh, how I'd heard about them. And because, you know, a lot of your reading can be very conventional, and it's great to hear about other people that are below the radar. Not that he's below the radar, or indeed Elizabeth Bishop per se, but you know, all poetry to an extent should be sort of from the underground if it's got any value, and their stuff certainly is, because in the case of Elizabeth Bishop, it's the preciseness of detail. You know, she's like it's as if she's put humanity, all its creatures, under the microscope, and is able to you know, forensically examine things without any real judgment, just an eye for detail that's quite, you know, staggering really. There's a poem of hers, The Sandpaper, which I suppose is you know, the equivalent of our curlew. And do you want me to read a little bit of it just to give a flavour? Because I suppose there's no purpose to these types of things if you're not trying to give people a flavour of what somebody they mightn't be quite aware of and might want to go and read the person. So I'm going to struggle to find the poem now, but it's on page 131. And this is just, I just think it speaks for itself, like all great poetry, defies analysis, and it's just that acute eye for literal detail. Yeah. So it's called Sandpaper. The roaring alongside he takes for granted, and that every so often the world is bound to shake. He runs to the south, finical, awkward, in a state of controlled panic, a student of Blake. The beach hisses like fat. On his left, a sheet of interrupting water comes and goes and glazes over his dark and brittle feet. He runs straight through it, watching his toes, watching rather the spaces of sand between them, where, no detail too small, the Atlantic drains rapidly backwards and downwards. As he runs, he stares at the dragging grains. The world is a mist, and then the world is minute and vast and clear. The tide is higher or lower, he couldn't tell you which. His beak is focused, he is preoccupied, looking for something. Poor bird, he is obsessed. The millions of grains are black, white, tan and grey, mixed with quartz grains, rose and amethyst. So I think there's a micro detail there, which he applies to human relations too in her own life, which is staggering really. And it's reflected in loads of poems, such as The Armadillo, The Fish, just endlessly observant. One of the great poets probably of the 20th century. The detail to the point where I think you've said before that, you know, a one-page poem can feel, once you've read it, like it has as much in it as a 400-page novel, because it has, it takes on such an image and it leaves you with so many images and leaves you having impacted you like that, and it's the sense of detail there that probably does that. Oh, without a doubt. And in her case, it's like it's the life detail of her life,
as she's lived it. So it's not quite autobiographical detail. What's great about Bishop is most of her poems are third person, even poems about her own life. It's as if she's. It's not the author that's important. It's the work of art, which is the ultimate, sort of artist craft, isn't it, and dedication to it. And she was famously influenced by an essay where her conclusion was that in her poetry, when she was starting to write it, and for the rest of her life, she didn't want to present a thought, but a mind thinking. And I think Milosz, I born in the same year, I think to me he's one of the other great poets of the 20th century, because like Friel, in translations, contextually, Milosz is there for some of the great events of the 20th century, and he feels it's his obligation to write about them. So Bishop is sort of in the sort of Emily Dickinson sort of frame of things, where it's a contained life to some extent. She's a very successful professor and all, but her life's private, and she presents you these great little moments. Milosz lives a very public life in his poetry, where he represents some of the great events of the 20th century. From the breakup of Russia and so on in 1991 and 89 and so on, and the growth of solidarity in Poland. But even further back in the Second World War, he has a masterly poem about Campo di Fiori, where he sees the connection between a square in Rome and the brutality it's seen, and an incident he witnesses in Warsaw. So I could read a bit of it if you want.
Yes, please do, yeah.
In Rome, on the Campo di Fiori, baskets of olives and lemons, cobbles spattered with wine, and the wreckage of flowers, vendors cover the trestles with rose-pink fish, armfuls of dark grapes heaped on peach down. On this same square they burned Giordano Bruno, henchmen kindled a pyre, close pressed by the mob, before the flames had died. The taverns were full again, baskets of olives and lemons, again on the vendors' shoulders. I thought of the Campo di Fiori in Warsaw by the Sky Carousel, one clear spring evening, to the strains of a carnival tune. The bright melody drowned the salvos from the ghetto wall, and couples were flying high in the cloudless sky. At times wind from the burning would drift dark kites along, and riders in the carousel caught petals in mid-air. That same hot wind blew open the skirts of the girls, and the crowds were laughing on that beautiful Warsaw Sunday. Someone will read his moral that the people of Rome or Warsaw haggle, laugh, make love as they pass by martyrs' pyres. Someone else will read of the passing of things human, of the oblivion born before the flames have died. But that day I thought only of the loneliness of the dying, of how when Giordano climbed to his burning he could not find in any human tongue words for mankind who live on. Already they were back at their wine or peddled their white starfish. Baskets of olives and lemons they had shouldered to the fair, and he already distanced as if centuries had passed, while they paused just a moment for his flying in the fire. Those dying here, the lonely, forgotten by the world, our tongue becomes for them the language of an ancient planet, until when all is legend and many years have passed, on a new Campo di Fiori, rage will kindle at a poet's word. So that to me is a great poem.
Yeah, and it goes back a wee bit to what we said about Friel as well, in terms of capturing that moment in history. And it's it's probably almost too big a conversation for today, but there's that. At the end of the day, literature is all about empathy, and when trying to get people to empathise with moments in history or with things in another country, with other people, at times the news itself can almost make that impossible, and history itself can be hard to get your head around, and literature is a gateway into a lot of understanding the people in history as well as just the events themselves. Yeah,
very, very much so. And often the motives behind the shallower people in history, not necessarily poets who don't have to be attracted to think about how they're thinking, because often that's reflective of much of humanity. This great poem, I think, sits in the same canon as works like W.H. Auden's Musée des Beaux-Arts about the indifference to suffering. I think Milosz does it so subtly. Even in translation we get the genius of it, through this constant reference to the olives and lemons, that life goes on, people eat, people get on with their sensual desires, and Giordano Bruno was this burned as a heretic at the stake. Meanwhile in Warsaw, 400 years later, Milosz seems to imply he's enjoying himself to some extent, while on the other side of the wall in the Warsaw ghetto these terrible events are taking place. Of course Milosz wasn't negligent in that regard, because this is from the great tradition, this poem of Samizdat, poetry written, published underground, because if he'd been known to publish it, and it would have meant probably immediate death at the hands of the Gestapo or something. So he didn't shy from his responsibilities, but he's really implying that all of us to some extent can be guilty of that. And of course none more so than in Ireland throughout history. So there is a connection with Friel.
Absolutely.
Great contextual writing, really.
I know the final writer you're going to talk about, fittingly, is Bennett Kylie,
Yeah.
which is a writer that you've discussed many times in Omagh before, and it's a fitting time of year because this, of course, is we're coming up to the time when usually the Omagh Literary Festival will be taking place, and I suppose I have to mention that we have a virtual Omagh Literary Festival event which will be broadcast on these pages on the 23rd of October. But tell me a bit about, I suppose, with your role with the Omagh Literary Festival and how that fits in with how you encountered Kylie's work. Is Kylie a writer you were aware of early on?
Yeah, I would have been aware of him. I remember. I mean, I don't know how early, but I remember in early days in teaching, teachers going on in other schools about him in different places. So he was well known to that extent. A lot of his fame at that, was famous as an author, of course, but wasn't he famously on Sunday Miscellany and all that, and so on.
His famous voice.
I think it was I'll probably get the year wrong, but I think it was 2002 when they decided it was Mary McGrath and Frank and Terry Sweeney and Stephen McKenna, amongst others, who started the festival, in his honour. And I would have been a regular attender at that. And then, with myself and Anthony White, with being in the school and trying to get kids to go to things and working with other teachers, we ended up doing a few things in it as well, and we're happy to do so. I'd be a great advocate of his work. I think, Prox Opera, we could talk about it, but Till the Cows Come Home, even though it's a short novel, but again, it's contextually very significant.
I think I always did was called the most humane literary reaction to the Troubles that there was ever written, really. So it's a hugely significant cultural book. That's
quite an accolade for it, and it's certainly it's sort of civilised outrage, that novel, at what's going on, and he just, you can see the character Binchy and so on. The main character is representative very much of Kylie's attitude. I'd brought in a few extracts from the short stories. His genius might be in the short stories because of the specificity of the locale, his descriptions of the Omagh area, and I suppose if this is for the local area, it might be nice to give people a flavour of.
Absolutely.
Of hopefully I've got the right chapter here, or section. This is a great story where they're heading off in a hired car. You can just imagine one of those cars from the 1920s, sort of. It's a Citroen. You just imagine it elevated. Of course, it breaks down somewhere near the Seven Streams or Clannabogan. But there's great intentions of the man driving the car that they're going to circumnavigate the globe, as he describes it here brilliantly. And hopefully this gives a flavour. They don't get any further than Clannabogan, I think, or the journey of the Seven Streams, maybe out to Miniburns. But the descriptions of the local area are tremendous. So this is an example of that. And he's talking initially here about the car. Regardless of appearance, he said, it'll carry us to the Stone Fiddle, and on the way we'll circumnavigate the globe, Clannabogan and Cavanagh, Pigeon Top Mountain and Corradroin, where the barefooted priests said mass at the Rock in the penal days, and Corraheskin, where the Muldoons live. Them, said the third sister. She had little time for the Muldoons since the day their lack of savoir faire cost her a box of chocolates. A male member, flaxen-haired, pink-cheeked, aged 16, of those multitudinous Muldoons had come by horse and cart on a market day from his rural fastness to pay us a visit. Pitying his gaucherie, his shy animal in a thicket appearance, his outback ways and gestures, she'd grandly reached him a box of chocolates, so as to sweeten his bitter lot with one honeyed morsel or two at the outside 3. But unaccustomed to towny ways in the moors of built-up areas, the rural swain had appropriated the whole box. He thought she said I was a paleface offering gifts to a Comanche, but by their own hearts, said my father, they're simple, hospitable people. And Cornavara, he said, and Dewish and Carrick Valley, and your Uncle Owen, and the two McCannies, the pipers, and Clara Moore, where there are so many Gormleys, every family has to have its own nickname, and Drumquin, where I met your mother, and Drumore, where you, pointing to me, were born, and where the mail train was held up by the IRA, and where the 3 poor lads were murdered by the specials, when you, again indicating me, were a year old, and the Miniburns where the 7 streams meet to make the headwaters of the big river. Hookie and Peter and the machine will take us to all those places. Like a magic carpet, said my mother, with just a little dusting of the iron filings of doubt in her voice. That extract, I suppose, shows Kylie's obsession with his locale. And he can't resist. He's sort of that journalism and journalistic influence in him, in sort of dipping into sort of, talking about local people and places. And then at the same time, there's the backdrop of terrible historical events that he feels the weight of history in the same way that Friel does. And this could be a feature of a lot of Irish writers, that they're sort of not borne down, but very much aware of what's come before them.
Well, I think it seems to be a feature of the writers you brought to us today. You talked about how literature has its accessibility, and the fact that it will, if people engage with it, it will speak to them and they will find things in it. And the way that so many of these writers actually achieve that is through detail. and it's through detail of the logo. Conor, thanks so much for joining us today. We could talk all day, but we'll have to leave it there. But there's plenty there for people to chew on, and hopefully a few new writers for them and a few classic writers that maybe they'll want to engage with even more. So Conor, thank you very much.
Not at all. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Conor. We're going to continue with the music now, and a song called Midnight at the Oasis, and I'm reliably informed that it was made famous by a lady called Maria Muldaur. Midnight at the Oasis, send your camel to bed. Shadows painting our faces, traces of romance in our heads. Heaven's holding a half moon, shining just for us. Let's slip off to a sand dune real soon and kick up a little dust. Come on, cactus is our friend. He'll point out the way. Come on, till the evening ends, till the evening ends. You don't have to answer, there's no need to speak. I'll be your belly dancer, prancer, and you can be my sheep. I know your daddy's a sultan, a nomad knowing to all, with 50 girls to attend him. They all send him and jump at his beck and call. But you won't need no harem, honey, when I am by your side. And you won't need no camel, no, no, when I take you for a ride. Come on, cactus is our friend. He'll point out the way. Come on, till the evening ends, till the evening ends. Midnight at the Oasis, send your camel to bed. Got shadows painting our faces and traces of romance in our heads. Thank you very much. Lovely to be singing about, camels and sand dunes and oasis as we move through autumn and winter. Anyway, we're going to continue with the music. An instrumental number called The Odd Couple, and for no particular reason at all, I now call it The Odd Couples. Lovely boys. And lovely boys. We're delighted that Kat Brogan from Omagh Pride was able to join us, or able to come in and join us on the actual day of the Pride celebration in Omagh. So she and Bob are going to have a little chat now.
Hi, we're here with Kat Brogan, the organiser of the Omagh Pride event. And right in the middle of it, this is a pre-record from Saturday, 25th of September. So Kat's right in the heat of battle now. So Kat, how are your preparations going?
It's all going great. We've got a wonderful big stage up in Southwest College. Got the bunting, lots of rainbow flags. It's been wonderful to see how the shops in the town have really embraced this. They've been doing a lot of DIY window displays. I was in a shop yesterday and the woman was like, I put my heart and soul into that window display. She was cutting up plastic bags to make buntings. So it's all been very DIY as well, which is great to see. Bit of recycling going on. Okay. And yes, we've got bands, we've got speakers, we've got drag, we've got a 20-piece samba band, we've got a 50-foot rainbow flag. So it's all coming together great.
Excellent. So from the shop's point of view, Blue Peter meets Pride Parade in a sense.
Definitely a bit of sticky back plastic
well,
going on.
You've got to watch out for the environment, haven't you, as well?
Yeah, no, it's definitely been something we've been really conscious of trying to make sure that we do limit our footprint and we think about the environmental impact of events, but also making sure that we make the town really colourful and bring that rainbow joy to Omagh.
Good, excellent. And I'm sure you've got a big team helping you, Kat, have you?
Yeah, we've been really lucky. I mean, it just really started off with myself and Lorraine Montague, like just having a chat on the phone about wanting to find ways to build an LGBT community in the town that we're from. And we just sort of thought, hey, why not? Let's have a Pride Parade. That seemed like a really accessible way to be able to give visibility to queer people in rural areas. Traditionally, Prides have happened in big cities, and people who are LGBT from this area have felt like maybe it's not going to be easy to have a queer life in the town. And this is just a real way to show people that, you know what, like Omagh is an accepting, tolerant place where they can love who they want to love with without judgment and without prejudice, and that can actually be not just tolerated or accepted, but embraced and celebrated as full members of our community, regardless of who they love.
Absolutely, absolutely. And my perception would have been that potentially west of the ban, west of the ban is less accepting, do you think, than the more urban societies, or is that not the case?
I think that west of the ban suffers from all sorts of injustices, and those are related to socioeconomic issues and infrastructure and just general provision. I've been living outside of the town now for 18 years, and I've come back. I've actually got quite angry because it does feel like if you're not in Belfast, you don't matter. And I think that's something that people, whether they're LGBT or not, can probably relate to. Yes. And that the reality is that people leave the town because there aren't a lot of socioeconomic opportunities here. So I think that this is just, another step that we can show that you can have a life in your hometown, in the place that you're born, in the place that you're from, in the place where your parents are growing old, and you need to get back and you need to spend time with them and not just go back in the closet for Christmas. Yes. To be able to bring your partner to your hometown, or meet a partner who's from your hometown. That'll be lovely too. So I think there's a lot to do west of the ban, and that needs to be addressed on a serious level. And of course, Pride is political, and LGBT rights are political, and that's why we've really had so many issues in Northern Ireland, because our political institutions are paralysed, and they haven't been copied, and we've had to rely on England and English MPs to force through equality in this country, and we still don't have a ban on gay conversion therapy. There's still young people out there who are being traumatised by religious groups who are trying to tell them that the way they are, the way that they are in there is wrong, and that's really damaging. So I think there's a lot to do, and that Pride is a real opportunity to welcome back people who might have felt like they have to go away to be gay, and to show that we can. this is a place where you can make a meaningful life for yourself, and where you're embraced by your family and by your community, and where you don't have to hide and you don't have to feel shame, and I think that's really important, and it's an invaluable step in really rejuvenating the west of the Ban in general, and Omagh and rural areas, and we should be able to have, it should feel like it's a choice that you choose, rather than that choice is made for you, either because of your sexuality or because of the socio-economic deprivation that's existed in this part of the world.
It's progressing though, Kat, is it? I mean, it's better than it was 10 years ago in your estimation?
Oh, 100% better than 10 years ago. It's like night and day. I mean, I think, to be honest, the internet has made a big difference. Because, you know, if you're a young person growing up queer in a rural area, like I was in the late 90s, I mean, you know, the first lesbian kiss happened in 1999 on TV. And the backlash was enough to destroy Ellen's career for 10 years in the wilderness she was after that. You know, so I think it's really important to remember that you can't be what you can't see. And that we're really lucky now that rural people, you know, back then it was like, we got the internet when I was 15, but it was like the desktop dial-up computer that was in the family room. Everybody could see your screen. You'd hardly be there, like, you know. So at least now they can be in the palm of their hand, discovering all these things. Oh, I'm not alone. Oh, there are people like me. It's not just this heterosexual representation that you get everywhere. And I think that's what we're really trying to show. And I mean, really, say for example, myself and my partner, like my friend is the 2-year-old that we live with. The 2-year-old has absolutely no problem with recognizing that we are a couple. He says our names together is like one breath. My niece has absolutely no issue, my 3-year-old niece, no issue recognizing the nature of our relationship. So it's only our society putting these ideas of what love is, you know, and that's whenever the sort of corruption happens of something that is just very pure and innate and natural. So I think that we're really, this is really important to have that visibility, because queer people haven't had that in rural areas, and maybe, you know, things are a lot better, but we still don't see, you know, people who sound like us standing up there and saying, yep, I'm a queer person, and that's okay.
That's interesting, Kat, in that from a guy of my age, your use of language, your use of the word queer, which when I was a teenager was a pejorative for gay people, but that's obviously changed then. Yeah,
I mean, I think that there's a long history of marginalised people, ostracised groups, reclaiming terms that have been used as slurs. And using them to show that, you know, almost like, okay, you can't hurt me with that word anymore. And for me personally, I mean, there are sorts, people have, you know, queer, do we like it, do we not like it? And of course for older people it might be more triggering as well, because it was used as a slur. I think for me personally, I just find like LGBTQ+IA, it becomes like a little bit like, and I'm not maybe it's the dyslexia, I'm just not a mad fan of the acronym. I just find acronyms like hard to form a relationship with.
And a definition of the way that queer is used now is the LGBT community then, is it?
Well, yes, and for me, of course not everybody would agree, and that's great. You know, we don't need everybody to agree, but everyone can have their own opinion about what word they want to use. I just feel that queer is a way of bringing everybody in. That if you have a sexuality that is divergent from male-female, or indeed a gender expression, be people trans, non-binary, gender queer, that queer is this umbrella term that sort of everybody can feel like, well, I feel that everyone can get behind, and we don't have to keep adding another letter every time. It's sort of like, and it allows for this sort of plurality. Like, you don't have to be, it's not, you know, sexuality and gender is not black and white. And I think the wonderful thing is that there is freedom for everyone in that. You know, you can show your feminine side. You can, maybe you're with the opposite gender, then maybe you're with the same gender. Like, that's grand. What's the problem? As long as everybody, as long as there is consent, As long as people are kind and loving and caring, then and everyone's over age, like what's the problem, you know?
Okay, listen, that's very clear. Listen, massive thanks, Kat, for taking the time off what's a very, very busy schedule. You rushed in here.
I am sweating the bed out, hey?
Yeah.
I've got the walkie-talkies in the handbag, so the high-vis is in the boot, and we're ready to go.
Right. Listen, good luck with the event, Kat.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you for featuring us on your show and for Culture Night. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Bob and Kat. We're going to do a duet, Mr. Legend. Oh my goodness. Hope Patricia's not watching. We're going to sing a lovely duet called Ne me quitte pas. He can say it better because he's a French person specialist.
I'm from Omagh.
He studied French.
Ne me quitte pas, il faut oublier, tout peut s'oublier, qui s'enfuit déjà, oublier le temps des malentendus et le temps perdu, à savoir comment oublier ces heures qui tuaient parfois, coup de pourquoi, le cœur de bonheur, ne me quitte pas. Ne me quitte pas, ne me quitte pas. Moi, je t'offrirai des perles de pluie venues du pays où il ne pleut pas. Je creuserai la terre jusqu'après ma mort pour couvrir ton corps d'or et de lumière. Je ferai un domaine où l'amour sera roi, où l'amour sera loi et tu seras reine. Ne me quitte pas, ne me quitte pas, ne me quitte pas, ne me quitte pas.
If you go away on this summer day, then you might as well take the sun away. All the birds that flew in the summer sky when our love was new and our hearts were high, when the day was young and the night was long and the moon stood still for the nightbird's song. If you go away, if you go away, if you go away, but if you stay, I'll make you a day like no day has been or will be again. We'll sail on the sun, we'll ride on the rain, we'll talk to the trees and worship the wind. Then if you go, I'll understand. Leave me just enough love to hold in my hand. If you go away, if you go away, if you go away.
Ne me quitte pas,
If you go
je
away,
ne veux plus pleurer,
as I know
je
you
ne vais
must,
plus parler,
there'll be nothing
je
left
me cacherai là
in this world
à
to
te
trust.
regarder,
Just an
danser,
empty
sourire et à t'écouter,
room, empty space,
chanter et puis rire. Laisse-moi devenir
like the empty look
l'ombre de ton
I see on
ombre,
your face.
l'ombre de ta main,
Oh, I'd have been the
l'ombre de
shadow
ton chien.
of your shadow,
Ne me quitte pas,
if it might have
Ne me
kept me
quitte pas.
by your side.
ne me quitte pas, ne me quitte pas. Merci bien.
Oh, c'est magnifique, Eden. Go on, speak some more French to us, because everyone, everyone, all three
Can't
people out
afford
there
me,
listening.
that was it.
Oh, I thought you were going to speak French first. Ne me quitte pas, featuring our lovely Aidan McGill. We're going to continue now with another instrumental called Cute. I'm saying nothing. What an appropriate tune to have just before I introduce Father Donal Bennett and Brendan McCarthy.
You'll rot in hell for that.
Father Donal Bennett, you're very welcome. Brendan, you're very welcome. Bob, of course, you're very welcome. Brendan, we heard lots of your story last month. Well, not that many people said that. No, we did not.
Come on, be honest, not that many people watched it.
Excuse me, plenty of people watched it. And Father Bennett, you have been a priest for almost 61 years.
Yeah.
Almost 40 years, or just 40 years of that spent as a missionary in the Philippines.
Right.
And then when we were chatting earlier, you had said you came back for a sabbatical year. Was that to sort of just settle you back into the ways?
No, we went to various places throughout the sabbatical year.
Okay.
I took a 3-month course in elderly behaviour at the University of Southern California.
That'll be very useful for Bob.
And then I took a 6-week course in St. Louis, Missouri, and then I went around various religious retirement homes and nursing homes, and that filled up the year before I took over the job.
Very good.
As director of our own nursing home.
Okay. In Navan.
Yeah.
That's in Navan. And we're here in the Struhl Arts Centre, and actually you were born very close to here, weren't you?
About 150 yards down Market Street.
My goodness. And you haven't lost your Omagh accent in all those years away either.
Yeah.
So we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you.
And our discussion this evening is on the Bible. And is it literally true or is it metaphorically true? And who decides? So what would your take be on that, Brendan?
Well, Gerarda, first of all, Donal, I've got to say I'm not worthy to be sitting at the same table. What great experience of life and energy that you're exuding. But Gerarda, I'm going to be a brat. Well, why not?
You're going to give an answer that
yeah.
is
non-committal.
non-committal.
I don't think the Bible is literally true, nor do I think it's metaphorically true. And I'm going to be a bit spoofy and say I think it's existentially true.
Okay.
And by that I mean the experience that the Bible writers brought to what they wrote was an expression of the truth as they perceived it. And in many cases, the truth as perhaps they knew it. Mm-hmm. And that's been recorded for us in a wonderfully rich tapestry of umpteen books. And of course, it depends what part of the Christian world you come from, how many books are in the Bible. For some Christians, it's 66. For others, it's 73. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Donal, I think is 83 or 88, I can't remember.
Don't look to me for confirmation.
When we talk about the Bible, it could be said, which Bible are you talking
Yes.
about? But whichever one you're looking at, the scriptures contain that wonderfully rich tapestry of life, of people's inquiries, of their experiential, existential truth. And then we come to the writings and we experience, I believe, very much the same thing. I bring my life and my experience to what I read, and out of my reading, and I believe, steered, guided, prompted, prodded by the Spirit, I find what for my life and my experience, again, is existentially true. So when you say, who decides? Well, of course, some people will say the church decides. Some people would say the councils of the church have said it. Some people would say the reformers. Mm-hmm. And of course, they disagree, even on very fundamental things like how many books are in the Bible. But I've got to say, you decide.
So when you say you decide yourself, you take from it what you want or what you feel you're being guided to?
Well, not what you want. Because very often I think what we need to take from it is what we don't want.
Well, that's
we're really
what I would
challenged by it.
Yes.
So it's not, I like this bit and I'll cherry pick. Mm-hmm. It's opening up ourselves to the experiences of those people, opening up ourselves to what experience I can gain from their knowledge and wisdom, the wrong things they did as well as the right things, the mistakes they made as well as the wonderfully visionary things that they wrote. And then letting that hit me. Okay. I used to believe, Donal, the Bible was very much literally true. And now I would say that now that I don't believe it, I actually take it much more seriously.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
And find it much more challenging.
Probably the younger you would have looked at it much more differently than the present you.
Yes, and I'm just a whippersnapper.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm just getting warmed up.
Holy moly, well, I'm going to interrupt you then very quickly. Father Donal, what about you? What do you think? Do you think mostly literal, metaphorical, combination of both?
Mixture of both.
Mixture of both.
Especially the early stages of the Bible, where it's probably something came down in the legendary bits and pieces from the ones who went ahead and went ahead and went ahead.
Yes.
And got written in some way that suited the mentality and the ability of the people that they were writing for. But then, as you move on into the Bible, you have to come to realize that what Isaiah is saying and the history of the Babylon and the history of Egypt and all that sort of thing, I really believe these things happened. It's not an airy-fairy story set by the writers. They were very likely speaking of times that wasn't so far distant from them. And then you come into the area of the God's dealing with these chosen people. Again, a good deal of it was written after the event that they say happened, crossing of the Red Sea, etc. But that seems to be very well articulated in some of the Psalms. And I think it's believable that there was something miraculous happened there, the release, the escape from Egypt. And then the whole story of the wandering through the desert and all that. But I'd be inclined to say that most of it is, while not actually historical, it's legendary. They are talking about legends, and somehow or other, the Lord had a hand in the whole thing.
Okay.
Other, if they didn't, we're all sunk.
I suppose that's the worry for an awful lot of people. And I think, of course we have, in the New Testament, we have all of the miracles. And I have said before, I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I do struggle to pass on the traditions and faiths and faith that my parents passed to me in a very changing world. It's such an immediate world that our young people live in, that we all live in at the moment. And the miracles in the Bible, the stories in the Bible, the Gospels when we go to Mass, the kids would have on occasion said to me, well, now surely that couldn't have happened. But the miracles you would, in your faith, believe literally.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sure, I preach about them all the time.
Well, exactly. Brendan, your idea of the Bible, the books, as you had said, had changed very much as you've developed as a person. In your life now, is the Bible part of your life?
It is. I read it yesterday, and maybe I'll read it today. I don't know.
And when you read it, do you randomly open and imagine and think, okay, I'll get what I'm looking for, I'll just open it up? Or do you sometimes go and
no,
look?
the way I read it now is, I might be thinking about something and think, that puts something in my mind. I remember, St. Paul said something about, or that's a bit of Matthew's Gospel is a bit relevant, and I'll turn to it and reread it. And I'll read it for some sort of insight or wisdom. I probably read it more now, in truth, than I did 30 years ago or 40 years ago when I told myself I ought to read it every day because that was part of a spiritual discipline that was, meant to be good for me. And, maybe it was, but I didn't do it. But now I read it more frequently. But I got to say, when I read it now, the question you asked Donal about the miracles or the historicity of this bit, I got to say, seldom enters into my mind. Because you take the story of Jesus turning the water into wine. Yeah. Now, did that happen literally? Well, we would all cheer if it did, because what a good miracle that was, turning water into wine. Or is it a symbolic story that was told about Jesus and about God, and Jesus and God's generosity and desire to celebrate with us? Now, whether it was literally an event that happened, or whether it's a story illustrating the sort of person Jesus was, to my mind, it makes no difference to the message of the story. It's about Jesus not being a killjoy. It's about him celebrating life, celebrating love. And, I've got to say this because of the time we're in. Omagh's first Pride parade happens almost as we're speaking.
Absolutely.
And what a good time to talk about Jesus celebrating human love and not being a party pooper and not wishing to stand back from a celebration of love. Now, whether it literally, there was, I remember working it out how many bottles of wine it would be. It was something like 750. That's quite a party. Right. But whether, literally all that water was turned into wine, or this is St. John, or the author of the Gospel, saying, let me tell you about the sort of person Jesus was.
Yes.
He's the sort of guy who would go to a wedding, and if the wine ran out, he would do this. Doesn't make any difference to the meaning of the story.
If I can take and argue a case for Gerda to a certain extent, as I'm trying to think how to describe her, as a practicing Christian, so as a recipient from you two gentlemen as clergymen, and as different from me as an atheist, Gerda is a recipient of your product, if you want for a better name. Is there not an issue with confusion about the message of the Bible to your congregations? I mean, you have a very astute view on it, but if members of the public had a more simplistic view, is there not lots of room for error, lots of room for taking things literally?
I was going to actually, Father Bennett, in my faith, in our faith that we share, my teachings would tell me that Jesus changing the water into wine is literal. That's one of the miracles that happened in the Bible. That's what I would have been taught, and if anyone asked me to name some of the miracles that happened, that would definitely be one of the ones that I would give as an example. So you, a very learned man, a priest for over 60 years, you would be saying, am I right in saying, you would be saying, that literally happened. That is one of the miracles that Jesus performed and that we're told about in the Bible.
I would be saying that. Yes. I am saying
that. Yes. I agree with what Brendan says in that it can be a lovely story of this is the personality. This is the sort of person who only wants to be inclusive. But in the Catholic faith, it's very straight.
Yes. It's not the sort of story that could be made up. It literally happened because he had such a regard for the two families involved, the bride's family and the groom's family. If they had run out of wine on such an occasion, those two families would have been stigmatized for the next 4 or 10 generations.
Yes.
And that's why the mother of Jesus, she twigged into what was happening. And she said to him, hey, they've no wine. And he went along with that. And I literally, honestly do think that is actually what happened.
Yes. And that's faith. And I think, Bob, you were saying, yes, I've been brought up in the tradition of Catholicism. And I think it is easier to believe that that is fact, rather than think for ourselves. I don't mean that we should think for ourselves, but I do think it's good to question. There's nothing wrong with questioning.
Exactly.
I feel that years ago we weren't encouraged to question. But I have to say that in questioning, it makes me feel a bit rocky. I think it's so much easier to have blinkers on as far as faith is concerned. I really do, to think, look, this is, I believe what I have been taught, I believe everything that I have heard. It's scarier ground to ask that question that maybe lots of other people have been thinking about as well. And that's where I get anxious. That's where I begin to feel a bit shaky.
And I think, Gerarda, that's why we need this wonderful spectrum of faith and belief. And, you know, as I've said before, Bob, if you're a self-described atheist, all the way through to a self-described, American right-wing fundamentalist and everybody in between, there's room for all.
Yes,
there really is.
And conversation.
And I would never ever want. You'd beat me hands down, Donal, anyway. But I would never want to argue with Donal and say, no, you mustn't take it literally. I've no interest in that discussion. What I do know is that there are people who desire the solidity and security of faith, and you've expressed it beautifully, Donal. There are people for whom that's no longer an honest place for them to be. Mm-hmm. And so they need not only to ask questions, but I think they also need to hear, Egypts like me say, not only are you questioning, but it's good too. And this is just as valid to take this interpretation. Now, Gerard, I would never tell you off because you're much too lovely to do that. But I would just take slight exception at the thought that what Donal has is faith and what I have isn't.
No.
The person who would say, this is a wonderful illustration of the person of Jesus, I think that's faith as well.
Yes.
And it's the same faith, just a different expression of it. And I know, Bob, you will kick against the goads, as they say in the King James Bible, like St. Paul. But I firmly believe that your life is part of the same expression of faith, because you are not a faithless person.
Absolutely not. I'm absolutely not. From my worldview, I have a constant sense of wonder and delight at being here and gratitude for being here, which I think everyone has, but I think you guys misinterpret that as a deity. I mean, I have no bother possibly with Spinoza's God, which at some future day we may well get into Spinoza, but for me, it's the optimism. I'm so lucky to be here. I am so lucky that I exist in this 21st century at the height of luxury and money and everything else that we have, unknown to our forebears, even a generation back. Yes. That is such a joyful thing to me.
You really are on track there. I believe that, for myself, that a good deal of my Christian life, priesthood, faith, originates from wonder and awe. And if you excuse me putting in a wee story here.
Of course.
We lived in Market Street, Christmas afternoon. This is years ago when I was aged 4, probably. My father took all of us ones up in the afternoon, probably while my mother was preparing the Christmas dinner. And it was a dim grey day. He took us to the Sacred Heart Church. I remember going towards the light because the nativity scene, the crib, was over on the right-hand side. Mm-hmm. And I remember, sticks with me all my life, I remember feeling a awe and wonder at this scene that was in front of me.
Yes.
I have some other occasions in my life in which I really, really felt awe and wonder.
Yeah.
And it's a great gift to have it. And I hope I never, never, never lose it, and I hope you never lose it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Gerarda, isn't that, Donal, what you've just said is so similar to a story I told in the last
Yes.
show of my first experience of awe and wonder. Clearly you're ahead of me in every way. I was 5 or 6 when I had a similar experience. I'm still learning, Bob, still learning. But Bob, the point you were making, I was reading a book by a really interesting neuroscientist, I think it's David Eagleman, who used to be an atheist, a self-described atheist, and he's now what he called himself a possibilarian, or a possibilian. That's it, a possibilian, where he says, I reject the certainties of atheism, and I can't go with the dogmas of organized religion, but in this wonderful, incredible, awesome multiverse, the possibilities are way beyond what our little minds can take.
Absolutely, yeah.
So my purpose in life, Bob, from now on, is to hear you describe yourself as a possibilian.
I want him to spell it.
I would sign up to it before I try to spell it, can I tell you?
Well, can I just say, because Brendan, I think you think that I was slightly disparaging.
No, I'm not. I'm just pulling your leg.
No, totally. I do love, I really admire the total faith that I know you have. And I can also acknowledge your questioning of your faith and living your life. But I imagine that there's a great strength, and you're strong. Yes, your faith is strong as well. But I imagine that there is great strength and comfort in that 100% belief that you have, I know you have, in Jesus Christ. I also fully appreciate the fact that you say, do question.
Of course, yes.
But it does make me feel rocky.
By the actual questioning, you are opening up the possibility that the Lord might talk to you, or some way it'll come through to you. And you'll be able to say, yeah, that's the right way of it.
Okay.
And it's a gift that the Lord bestows on various people. And if I'm at this point, if I may say, all of what we're talking about, as you mentioned, is getting back to the fundamental, excuse the expression, fundamental experience of the fact that, I know there is a God, and He has given me the gift of believing Him, and He has made a great sacrifice by sending His own Son, who in turn made His sacrifice for us ones. Now, if we can hang, if we can hang all of our faith life, spiritual life, on that number one fact that God exists, and He has an interest in each one of us personally, I adore a personal God. And I do believe it's the greatest gift that He can give me. And everything else comes from out of that. The activities of the church to which I belong, and the family and the community to that I belong to. It's all a gift.
Yep.
All of life, as you say, Bob, is a gift.
Absolutely. And I think, unfortunately, that the time's up for this particular
Yes.
episode. So, but what struck me, Brendan, and I think I said this to you the last time, the old proverb is that the the two people in the village who are most interested in God is the village priest and the village atheist. I think that's
like
true.
that.
Do you know, Bob, I think it is, and I want to expand it and think that between those two, there are lots and lots of people who are a little bit scared to say this really interests me, but they want to talk about it.
Or this really confuses me. Yes.
And those folk are really beginning to engage. Donal, you put your faith beautifully. I would love to paint an equally beautiful picture of my faith, and maybe that will be in a different programme that doesn't contradict yours, but it colours it slightly differently.
Yes.
Well, we could most definitely continue this next month if you were both willing to come back again.
If you pay the same.
Oh,
Yeah, absolutely.
croissants that you may look at. Father Donal, thank you so much for coming in. I really do hope that you will come back. Brendan, thank you for coming back. We definitely hope that you'll come back to the Culture Show next month as well. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to return now to some brilliant music with the one and only Bob Quick Quintet. Thank you. So Bob and I are back now with the Bob Quick Quintet after a great wee chat with Brendan and Father Donal. I think, do we feel rejuvenated?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Rejuvenated.
Spiritually rejuvenated. We're going to continue now with a brilliant tune called I'm in the Mood for Love. I'm in the mood for love, simply because you're near me. Funny, but when you're near me, I'm in the mood for love. Heaven is in your eyes, bright as the stars we're under. Oh, is it any wonder I'm in the mood for love? Why stop to think of whether this little dream might end? We put our hearts together, now we are one. I'm not afraid if there's a cloud above. If it should rain, then let it. But for tonight, forget it, 'cause I'm in the mood for love. Simply because you're near me. Funny, but when you're near me, I'm in the mood for love. Heaven is in your eyes, bright as the stars we're under. Oh, is it any wonder I'm in the mood for love? Why stop to think of whether this little dream might fade? We put our hearts together, now we are one. I'm not afraid if there's a cloud above. If it should rain, then let it. But for tonight, forget it. I'm in the mood, I'm in the mood, I'm in the mood for love. Thank you so much for joining us. We've come to the last number of this Culture Show. We couldn't do it without the support of the Good Relations Department of Fermanagh and Omagh District Council and also the Community Relations Council, so thank you to those. Thank you to our wonderful guests. We had Conor McClusy talking to Andrew Maguire. We had Father Donal Bennett and Brendan McCarthy with us, and we appreciate Kat Brogan from Omagh Pride popping in as well to fill us in on what was happening. We also are delighted to be working with the Sound Garden from Drumquin here, David Doonan and his lovely wife Carol, so thank you both so much. We're going to finish off with a song. I'll tell you what it's called. It's called It's Not Unusual, although some things are. See you next month. Thank you. It's not unusual to be loved by anyone. It's not unusual to have fun with anyone. But when I see you hanging around with anyone, it's not unusual to see me cry. I wanna die. It's not unusual to go out at any time, but when I see you out and about, it's such a crime. If you should ever want to be loved by anyone, it's not unusual, it happens every day. No matter what they say, you'll find it happens all the time. Love will never do what you wanted to. Why can't this crazy love be mine? It's not unusual to be mad with anyone. It's not unusual to be sad with anyone. But if I ever find that you've changed at any time, it's not unusual, it happens every day. No matter what you say, you'll find it happens all the time. Love will never do what you wanted to. Why can't this crazy love be mine? To find out I'm in love with you.
That was very unusual.